Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is Hamza the Historian, and this is part 2 to that coast-to-coast interview about the Jinn and the paranormal. So these are paranormal researchers Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who recently passed away, and Philip Imbrogno. And they have, a book that I talked about. I did receive it now, The Vengeful Jinn, Unveiling the Hidden Agendas of Genies, which I believe was published in 2013. Let me double check here, see if it says. So 2011 was the first edition. This is the 7th printing in 2020 that I got here. So there seems to be still some interest in this book. I'm actually more interested in the book The Jinn Connection by Rosemary Ellen Guiley. Bleh, can't talk. But it seems to be out of print, unfortunately, and it seems like she was pretty much single-handedly in charge of this, of the printing press that printed that book, too. Wow. So, Wellen Publications that published The Vengeful Jinn is actually based right here in Minnesota, in Woodbury. I've been to Woodbury a number of times. Maybe I can actually physically go there. Fascinating. Yeah, I think I'll have to stop over there sometime. But yeah. Basically, what fascinates me personally about this particular book of these researchers, and the idea that fascinates me, is that they think other types of supernatural entities, what's called in Arabic وراء الطبيعة, these things like shadow people, demons, extraterrestrials, Mothman, lizard people, chupacabra, yeti, Bigfoot, you name it. It's really just the Jinn, because the Jinn are shapeshifters. And this idea is, I guess, hit on a lot more in another interview that I have of Rosemary Ellen Guiley. So I plan to put that on my YouTube channel here as well. So besides this one, I probably have 2 more videos coming up on the same topic. And I think that, Muslim theologians, in a sense, have kind of failed to keep up with contemporary ideas for Muslims in the West. In the Western context, we have all these supernatural things that I think often can be confusing, such as ghosts or aliens or these different things you'd see on like the Sci-Fi Channel and whatnot. And Muslims sometimes wonder, are those things real or not? Well, the reality is they're actually the Jinn. And so I think, this is a real fascinating idea that Muslim theologians should be appropriating, and they should be, talking about these things. Because it could cause some people even to question their faith and different things like that. So yeah, these are just really interesting ideas. Also, from the point of view of a historian of religion, from the religious studies point of view, New Age religion, people who are into the occult, that's kind of its own subfield in and of itself. And this is also showing how ideas are changing amongst that group. They're appropriating ideas from Islamic civilization, which is something I think fairly recent. I don't think I've seen this really talked about in those circles before. So for me, this is all just very interesting. It also is nostalgic because I actually listened to these live on the radio when I used to work overnights at an eyeglass factory called National Vision in central Minnesota. So yeah, anyways, I hope you guys enjoy the interview and take a listen.
Existed a long time ago, and people started saying, well, they were called Jinn. And I was just asking stories because I was just asking about legends and finding and so on. And they said, well, we don't really know too much about the Jinn here. All of that information is lost. And when I was in Tel Aviv and I went to Jerusalem, and I had a friend who I served with in the military who was actually in Vietnam, and he stayed in the military and became very high-ranking military. He ended up, when he retired, because of his background, ended up a high-ranking officer in charge of security at the royal family in Saudi Arabia. So from Israel, I telegraphed him and said, I would like to come into Saudi Arabia. I'm doing research. I got fascinated with it. I know that's the place to go to find the legends of the Jinn. And immediately he sent me a telegram and said, come on over. I'll arrange it so you get in the country, no problem. And so I land in Riyadh, and and it's so strange because I'm going through customs, and all of a sudden the customs officer, he looks at my passport, he looks at me, and he waits for guards to come. And the strange thing, I says, oh my gosh, I know what is going on here. And the people behind me in line, they start backing away. And he gets on the computer, and he just instructs me to go into this room, to sit down.
And they're trying to figure out who are you.
And I'm trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. Because what happened is that was the time when the king had a stroke, and the government was very concerned about being overthrown.
Okay,
I think maybe he was overthrown already.
Right.
So to make a long story short, actually, my friend Jack wanted to just, take me out of the customs things and bring me over, and they picked me up in a limousine. First, I thought I was going to prison. But anyway, he arranged, he said, we're having dinner tonight with the royal family. And not the king, but one of the princes, who didn't show up, by the way, one of the cousins did. Well, to make a very long story short, and all this protocol I had to go through and everything, I was sitting at the table at dinner, and it was the cousin of the prince, and I can't remember his name, but he was some type of minister, because everybody was calling him Excellency. And over there, you're not supposed to talk to anybody of the royal family unless they address you first. So I'm sitting at the dinner table, and my friends with me, and so on, and the prince looks over, the cousin of the prince looks over to me and says, you are an American. Why are you in my country? And I said, well, I'm here studying the Jinn. And he gets all excited, and he goes, the Jinn? And everybody on the table just looked his way. And he says, I can tell you about the Jinn. They are in my country. They come into my country from their world, and your government is trying to capture them. What? I said, what? And he began to tell me a story that there's a group of international black ops, whatever you want to call them, secret organization that is composed of Saudis and other Middle Eastern country, plus people from Great Britain and certain other countries of Europe and the United States especially, that is trying to capture a Jinn and trying to get the technology that they have for crossing the dimensions. Now, this kind of surprised me because...
And he was dead serious, wasn't he?
Oh, he was dead serious. And then I asked him, did they ever catch one? And he said he doesn't know because that is a matter of the highest security, and he's not privileged to that information. He said, but he can tell me where to go to find out about the Jinn. So he directed me to, and then he said that our conversation is over, and he started interacting with and he started talking in Arabic to my friend Jack, who understands it. I don't understand the language. And after dinner, I said, well, what did he say to you? He says, well, he wants me to take you to a holy man who lives on the other side of town, and this man has all the knowledge of the Jinn. So Jack arranged for his lieutenant, his captain, to take me that morning to this holy man, and and I was briefed before going, and I had to I got out of my American clothes and dressed in more traditional clothes because I was a target as an American because it was not a safe part of the town. You have to remember, in the city over there, they have two classes of people: the extremely rich and the extremely poor.
Right. Right.
So we went to this building, and he told me it was at one time a mosque or a holy building. It was 300 years old. And he said, when you go in to the holy man, you can ask one question, but don't get into a discussion with him. And I went in, and he was smoking some type of water pipe. I don't know how old this person was.
A hookah, they call it. It's a hookah.
A movie. And I started asking about the Jinn and asking about all of these questions, and he started giving me all these answers, giving me the history of the Jinn, and giving me all these legends and telling me the stories. And after a few hours, he said he was tired, and I was having it all translated because he didn't speak English. But he told me that there was a place in the country of Oman, a place called Majlis al-Jinn. And that translates into the meeting place of the Jinn, which was a cave where the Jinn enter our world, and the Jinn are sort of like captive in this enormous cave.
Interesting. Almost like that's where a portal is, huh?
Right, exactly. So, of course, I had to go and see this place. And luckily, having the connection now, everything was arranged to go to Oman and go to the Cave of the Jinn. And it was an adventure for me. And I wrote a whole chapter just about in the book about it. And now the strange thing happened there. We went to the Cave of the Jinn, the Majlis al-Jinn. And this place was like off limits to everybody who would go there. None of the locals would go there. But when I was in one of the villages, I think Hajar, in the Hajar Mountains, I was talking to a teacher who spoke very good English, and he was Arabic, and he told me that while hiking through the mountains one day, he encountered a Jinnaya, a female Jinn with her child. And he said he was terrified. He said, but what happened next, he said, was even more terrifying. He said helicopters appeared, and he said government agents from Saudi Arabia and his country and Americans took him to a base in the mountains and debriefed him and asked him exactly what he saw, the encounter exactly, and he said they were interested in capturing the Jinnaya. Now, I said, oh my gosh, I just heard a story like this. Now, and I said, well, can you elaborate? Give me more information. He said, no, they told me not to say anything. He said that he was more afraid of these government agents that were trying to capture this Jinn than the Jinn.
Interesting.
Now,
and it's one of the biggest caves in the world, isn't it?
Yes, it's one of the biggest caves in the world. As a matter of fact, you can fit the Pyramid of Giza in this cave. But the fascinating thing is that shortly after that, in the 1990s, it became open to tourists. And then the government, the Ministry of Oman, closed the cave. They even filmed a commercial in there, a car commercial. They closed it down. No one's allowed there now.
What happened?
Well, they cite that no one ever got killed there or hurt there, but they cite that the cave has been closed down because of safety concerns. But the thing is that according to what the people say over there and the stories, is that the government closed it down because the Jinn are there and they established themselves in that cave as a beachhead into our world. And the Jinn already have a great influence on some of the governments in the Middle East and some of the towns they're already controlling. The stories I heard is that certain Jinn have made their way into our world and are actually controlling entire towns over in Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and some of the other countries. But the strange thing about this government secret organization trying to capture a Jinn to obtain its dimensional technology, over in Pine Bush, New York, there was a lot of activity with the Hudson Valley UFO sightings. On more than one occasion, military units came in and closed off areas and told the people to stay inside. It was nothing more than a training exercise. And the stories I picked up before the Saudi Arabia trip of mine is that there were dimensional beings coming into that area, and the government was trying to capture them. So this is a story that I heard from 3 different sources in 3 different countries about a secret organization in the government knowing that the Jinn exist and trying to capture these dimensional beings to obtain their technology.
This is amazing stuff.
Well, I mean, it was like that trip over there, and all of this was like an adventure I will never forget. Of course, I probably couldn't do it again, but I was actually at the Cave of the Jinn and with my translator and my guide and my protector, and they said they weren't going in. The only way in is through holes in the top of the mountain, and it's 300 feet down to rappel to the level, and they brought rope and everything. They said, my friend, you're going in alone. And I started rappelling down, and I was down maybe about 150 feet or 75 feet. And I look up and I hear them screaming to each other in Arabic, and I didn't understand any of the words, but I understood one word that they said. And they said the word Jinn. And then I see them leave the opening, and they're running down the hill. And so I climbed back up just in time to see them running down to the car, and I said, where are you going? I was afraid they were going to leave me there, and they said, you have to there's a Jinn. A Jinn told us to get out of there. Evidently, going back to the city, they were saying all of these Arabic prayers in the car, and my guide from Saudi Arabia said that he never believed in Jinn until that day.
Now, do they possess people?
And he said that they heard a voice.
They hear voices. Okay.
And they heard a voice, and it was the voice of a Jinn that told him to get out now. And I'll tell you, I was afraid that they were going to leave me somewhere in the back country there. But the cave now is closed to the public from the Oman ministry. They closed it down. But the Jinn do possess people, yes. And getting back to that a little bit, you can't get rid of them. According to the beliefs over in Syria especially, they have holy men who will come and try to ask the Jinn to leave. And what they do is the Jinn who's possessing a person, and they usually do it to obtain physical pleasures, they have to bargain with them. Okay, we will not do anything. How long are you going to stay in this body? 1 month, 2 months? They make a deal with the Jinn, and the Jinn will usually keep the arrangement. I'll stay here 2 months and then I'll leave. Okay, very good. Bless you, bless Allah, and so on and so on. But that's the only way that you can get rid of the Jinn. Sometimes some of the exorcisms and where they take the person and they beat the person so bad that the Jinn feels the pain through the person and the Jinn leaves. But of course, they say that the person doesn't feel the pain. The Jinn just feels the pain, but I doubt that. And then the person's, of course, left with all of these marks from the beating. So there's 2 ways. They bargain with the Jinn, or they beat the body to produce so much pain so that the Jinn wants to leave.
That is something. All right, Rosemary, let me ask you this. What do you think they want with the human race?
I think that they want to have domination over us. We're the ones who have dominion over this world, this physical realm, and many of the Jinn feel that that is rightfully theirs. They don't want us occupying their private places. We have found in our cases that areas that have caves and mine shafts in them, especially old abandoned mine shafts, are really riddled with Jinn. I think that we have many Jinn habitats right here in America, and we've been researching those. So they're kind of establishing these, by stealth, these sort of, you could call them beachheads in our world, where they're finding more and more ways to come in. As you know, I deal with a lot of paranormal researchers and investigators, and I'm often called to investigate hauntings. I have been reevaluating most of my cases from the standpoint of Jinn. And I think that when we have these cases where there are intense and persistent phenomena, very annoying, that resist remedies, that the stuff comes back again and again, we're not dealing with ghosts or poltergeists. We're dealing with Jinn. More and more, I think that ghostly activity tends to be more of the residual sort, and the more active things where you've got entities causing effects on people, we're dealing with Jinn. I think that these low-level entities who come through the Ouija board cases where people have problems with those, we're not dealing necessarily with demons. We might, but I think more often than not, we're dealing with Jinn. So I think we need to reevaluate a lot of our interactions with entity contact. And what Phil was saying about government interest in this, it makes perfect sense that if we could actually capture an entity who has abilities to move between dimensions, that would be of great interest to us.
I'm not sure if the Jinn would cooperate.
Some of them might, but the thing is that they would always have their own interests because they do have this trickster nature. They can agree to things that they wind up twisting or going back on. We seem to be, obviously trying to get extraterrestrial information and contact as well. Some of those cases may actually be Jinn cases and not ETs. But the Jinn, it's said that the Jinn are closer to human beings than are other kinds of entities. They're certainly closer to us than angels are or demons are, and so harnessing their abilities, their know-how to manipulate matter would be advantageous, and I think that we do have agencies that are pursuing these agendas.
How do these entities feed on people's souls?
They feed off energy, and it is possible to make pacts with Jinn, the same as you can make pacts with demons, and you're not necessarily selling your soul into hell so much as maybe making a bargain with a jinni that your life essence can be used by them for manipulative purposes, which would enable them to come and go between dimensions or to stay in this dimension much longer.
Okay, stay with us. Much more to talk about with both of you when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. If you need to email me, that's George at coast2coastam.com. We'll take a few of your calls this half hour with Rosemary and Phil, and then next hour, a full-blown hour of phone calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. Rosemary or Phil, Chrissy from Santa Monica sends a text and wants to know if the female Jinn have a different appearance. That's an interesting question. Are there sexes?
Oh, yeah. They have two different sexes like us, and they have children. And the female Jinn can take on a very feminine appearance, and some of them are reported to be quite beautiful. And most of the Jinn, by the way, if they're not taking a hideous form, which they do to scare humans sometimes, they're supposed to be like made of the purest of fire, and they can take on very, very wonderful, beautiful forms. But they do have two sexes, and one of the other things is that they seem to be able to have children with humans, and that's forbidden in Islam. But there are cases of it in history where supposedly that there has been a Jinn in a human marriage. The Queen of Sheba was supposed to be the child of a human and a Jinn.
Okay, Rosemary, as you did your research for this, was there anything that you came across that surprised you?
I think what surprised me the most was the apparent pervasiveness of the Jinn in interacting with human beings. I think that it's far more widespread than we might realize because of their ability to masquerade and shapeshift. And it's not just confined to the Middle East because we know of them through Middle Eastern folklore. The Jinn are everywhere. And as I mentioned earlier, we have Jinn pockets right here in America. I've been doing a lot of research in the East Coast, in the Alleghenies and Appalachians, which I think are heavily Jinn-haunted, and also some cases out in the West. We can certainly compare the activity at the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah to Jinn activity as well. And in fact, the Jinn may intermingle with some of these other entities that we're dealing with. It may not be just one or the other all the time. It could be a combination of. But the Jinn are chameleon-like in their ability to make us think that we're dealing with something else.
Okay, Phil, the work that you've been doing as it relates to this, do you find that it is more prevalent in the Middle East, in Europe, than it is here in this country? I mean, are people even aware of the Jinn here?
No, actually, they're not. Like I said, I started introducing the idea of the Jinn to paranormal investigators in two of my last books. And, it's been catching on. The idea of the Jinn has becoming very popular in this country. But, you see, in this country, paranormal investigators and UFO investigators especially go away from cases scratching their head because something's missing. There's a big gap there. What's going on here? When you factor in the idea of the Jinn, this ancient race, into the equation, the entire paranormal and the UFO phenomena starts to make sense. One thing you have to consider about dimensional beings in the UFO phenomena is that even Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was the dean of ufology, the foremost authority in ufology until his passing in 1976.
After he changed.
He said to me, I was very good friends with him. He said that he believed that, most of this UFO stuff is dimensional in nature. They're beings from another dimension. So here we go,
As Jacques Vallée has always
exactly.
believed. Let's go to the phones. We'll go to Linda in Charlotte, North Carolina, east of the Rockies. Hey, Linda, welcome to the program. Thanks for calling.
Hello, George. It's so nice to talk to you tonight. I can't believe I got through.
Well, you've been on hold long enough. You deserve to get through.
I'm hoping maybe your guests will have some answers for me. Maybe they can solve a problem I've been having. I've had numerous supernatural things happen for years, and I was living in the Appalachian Mountains, and I started waking up with little bruises on me that looked like fingerprints, and they were taking energy because I would be so weak I couldn't walk for about 3 days after this happened, and this has followed me for 17 years.
Rosemary, Phil, do these entities physically hurt people?
Rosemary's.
They can, yes. They can adversely affect our health. They can do things that we associate with demons, like leave bruise marks, pinches, and that sort of thing. They can cause depression. They can influence our thoughts. And if they manage to attach to people, and I think that some of them do, they do follow people around. Some of them seem to be more place-oriented. If you come onto their territory, they're going to give you a very bad time, and they want you out of their house, so to speak.
Do they want to kill? I mean, can they cause tragic car accidents and things like that?
They can, yes. And we associate that with demons as well. They can interfere with electrical things. Well, Phil and I were doing a lot of the research for this book. I had massive car problems, quite a bit, and interferences that way. They can.
I always thought you had a chauffeur. Gosh,
they'd probably interfere with that too.
Yeah.
But they can also cause financial problems, too. There are a lot of ways that they can mess around with your life. But the worst, of course, is when they affect your physical health and your mental well-being.
That's interesting. Now, what do you recommend Linda do, for example? What can she do?
Sometimes Well, sometimes they respond to conventional things that we would use.
Do you pray?
Prayers can be effective against some of them. In Middle Eastern lore, prayers will burn the jinn, and that causes them to want to get away from you. So Islam and Christianity, all faiths, of course, have prayers that are remedies against interfering malevolent entities.
Let me ask you, Phil, do you think at any point when, religion talks about hell, could they be talking about where the jinn hang out?
I think they're in kind of a hell. They're like in a dimension that's devoid of physical pleasures, which they want. The jinn do have free will, and so they really can't be cast away. But according to the Islamic belief, jinn as well as humans, as angels, are going to be answerable to all the things that they've done at the Day of Judgment. And according to what I found out, some jinn do believe this. They do believe in God, so they believe that if they do things wrong, they're going to be held accountable for it. But then again, some jinn don't. Some jinn, just like people, are psychotic, and they will come after you, and they will cause you harm, and there's nothing you can do really to stop them except, if you know how to get rid of them.
If you know people who literally shapeshift, and I don't mean just physically, but emotionally, might they be possessed by something like the jinn?
It's possible. I think, human beings are very complex, so there could be multiple personalities and so whatever. But I think there is some influence on some people from jinn. But most of the time, I think they like to masquerade themselves and appear like spirits or extraterrestrials or spirit guides or other things like that, ascended masters, just to walk in and get your confidence to make this connection. And once you make the connection, they're very hard to get rid of because they want you to acknowledge them, to accept them. And once you do that, it's free will, and it's your choice.
I think in the case of the caller's question about, how can she deal with this, one of the things that we have to do is ascertain exactly what it is we're dealing with. And because human beings can be affected by a variety of entities, you have to look at the whole case, how it started, when it started, what it does, and how an individual is affected by things to try and determine exactly what's going on. And in the case of some of these persistent afflictions, like the shadow people, for example, who can attach to people, sometimes just trying to do some sort of interference with magnetic fields seems to be the most effective, and it will at least dampen the activity. It doesn't necessarily make it ever go away permanently, but it can dampen it down and make it hard for them.
We'll go to Minneapolis, Minnesota now. Henry's with us on Coast to Coast. Hi, Henry.
And Phil and Miss Rosemary. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks.
I just had something to add. I was wondering about King Solomon. You mentioned that he had something to do with making the jinn rebuild the temple. And I was wondering if you guys have ever heard of the book called the Gogita, supposedly written by King Solomon. It's called The Lesser Key of King Solomon. And it spoke how he would trap jinn or spirits or demons, trap them in objects such as stone statues and crystals. And also I wondered if the jinn are also possible for the presence of the multiple gods that we've had throughout mythology, since they can shapeshift and appear as anything that they would like to appear as. I just wanted to know what your thoughts on that would be.
All right, which one of you two wants that?
Well, Rosemary can answer most of about, the Solomon Key. And I can just say one thing. Yes, I do believe that jinn are responsible for a lot of our beliefs in different gods and demigods and so on. But Rosemary, you want to take the rest of it?
Sure. There are two keys of Solomon, and the greater key of Solomon is supposed to be the one attributed to the king. And out of all the magical grimoires, the textbooks for dealing with what we would call demons or jinn. Most of them were written much, much later than the time that the King Solomon was supposed to have lived. But the Greater Key is a handbook that is attributed to his wisdom and does seem to have some roots in antiquity to draw upon, and it contains various formulae for conjuring entities and controlling them. And the Lesser Key of Solomon came along much later, as did most of the other grimoires. But they have the names of entities. Sometimes they're called spirits. Sometimes they're called angels. The hours and the days that they can be summoned, and some of the magical symbols and seals that are used in interacting with these entities. My feeling about conjuring is that it's tricky business and not something to be undertaken lightly. There are individuals, of course, throughout history who have the aptitude or the skill that they've developed in dealing with the spirit world, but entities are extremely difficult to conjure up and to control. And with the jinn especially, who are very powerful, you're dealing with something very dangerous if you try and have the upper hand in dealing with these entities.
Are you too concerned at all about your own safety as you investigate this?
Well, it does cross my mind from time to time, and, both Phil and I have been doing interdimensional contact work for quite some time, and we have seen other people around us quite adversely affected. I have had no serious problems myself, but I have been affected, especially by the jinn, more so than anything else, including the demonic realm that I've investigated. They've demonstrated their ability to make their presence known in ways that other entities have not in my research, and it's like they want you to know that they can come and affect you if they desire.
Okay, let's go to Joan in San Diego, west of the Rockies. Hey, Joan, go ahead. Hi.
Good evening. I have a bad throat. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to try to make a long story as short as I can.
Sure.
When I was 23 and I moved to California, I was near water, the washing machine, and this voice said to me, "You will have an important mission someday." I never told anybody because it was right in the middle of God is dead and, the hippie thing. And I never really thought about it much afterwards, but my subconscious mind was thinking of it, and I was a wanderer. I couldn't take a permanent job. I just kept wandering. And I am a walk-in because I died when I was about, 45, and in the bathtub, water again. This voice in my right ear said, "You have to go back and heal families." Now, that made no sense to me because I couldn't even help myself do anything. And the reason that I was so ill was I had my twin inside of me. They call it the vanished or vanishing twin, and it's on Discovery Health.
But this sounds like a good thing for you, Joan.
Well,
right?
What happened was, after the near-death thing, I started writing. I wrote a screenplay for children that is on a genius level. I sent my work, when it was only a third done, to a man by the name of William Greenleaf, and he didn't even charge me. He just was overwhelmed with the plot and the story. But, and then I came up with this craziest way for children to read, and it caused a mini riot at Barnes & Noble's because everybody wanted it and they wanted me to sign it.
Okay, but what are you saying? Is this something help you?
I don't know. I just know that I was supposed to write these things.
So let me ask you this, Rosemary. Because we've talked about the jinn could be good or evil. Can they help someone like that?
There may be some of them who might be interested in using people as channels for putting out information into the world. And so they might have a different sort of relationship with individuals, which is not to say that every time we're inspired or that we have an encounter with what we feel is a higher spiritual being of a benevolent sort. We're not saying that all those are Jinn cases, but the Jinn can use those avenues as a way of they could be putting out lines of thought or influence or information that they would like human beings to absorb. But my take on the Jinn is that it's always from the perspective of ultimately it will benefit them and not necessarily us.
Well, there's one thing I can add to that, is that there's a belief that if you're being tormented by a very nasty Jinn who's responsible and belongs to a Jinn family, it's possible for you to contact a good Jinn who's the leader of that family and get that Jinn to come and help you to get rid of the Jinn who's tormenting you. They actually have courts, according to the belief, is that certain Jinn who are doing bad things can be brought to their actions and held accountable for their actions. So there is a loophole there, but most of the time they say it doesn't work because the good Jinn don't want anything to do with human beings. It's just that the evil Jinn, the red Jinn, have one thing in mind, and that's the destruction of the human race.
Okay, we're going to come back with full-blown phone calls with both of you when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. We'll be right back. Rosemary and Phil have done a thorough job, haven't they? Fascinating. We'll be back with more in your phone calls on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast with Rosemary Ellen Guiley and Phil Imbrogno as we talk about their upcoming work, of course, called The Vengeful Jinn. Rosemary, this is coming out in March, I guess, right?
It is, and we're talking about this topic now because it's of such intense interest, especially in the paranormal community. Both of us have been getting inquiries about the Jinn. Information about them and questions about them are circulating, and we feel it's really important to get information out, especially to people who are investigating cases, because the Jinn need to be factored in to a range of explanations in terms of what goes on in each case. I have a Jinn page up on my website, visionaryliving.com, and we are developing an entire website devoted to the Jinn called JinnUniverse.com, which will be up and running by the end of the month. And we'd like this to be a forum for people to get their questions answered, to have additional resources to look at, and to report their experiences and cases.
The Irish myths of the leprechauns and the other myths of fairies, might people have been talking about the Jinn?
Absolutely. When I compared the Jinn to angels, demons, the cryptids, the extraterrestrials, all of these other entities that human beings have had interaction with throughout history, the most intense correspondence was between Jinn and fairies. It's absolutely amazing. Their history, fairies are outcasts from their realm. They were the early inhabitants of the earth who lost their dominance to people. They're linked to the demonic like the Jinn are. They are the hidden people. They like to live in subterranean places. They believe they're superior to people. They have long lifespans, but they're not immortal. They're organized into societies and families. They can mate with human beings. The list goes on and on. The comparisons between fairies and humans causing possession, the shape-shifting, tricks and malevolence. And interestingly, they're both weakened by iron.
Okay, let's go back to the phones. This hour will fly by. Rick is in Denver, Colorado. Good morning, Rick. You're up.
Hey, good morning, George.
Hi.
Love your show.
Thank you.
Hey, the reason I'm calling in tonight is because I had an experience when I was down in New Zealand that I've never been able to put any kind of explanation to as of yet.
Okay, share it with us. Maybe they can help you.
Well, I mean, now that I hear about this kind of, basically, I'm interested in the distinction between angels and demons and the Jinn, because I've been somewhat familiar with angels and demons kind of as a Christian, as far as having angels and demons and things like that. But when I was in New Zealand, I used to ride around a lot, mountain biking, and one night I ended up in this park, and I don't think there was any caves that I can remember, but it was a very low spot. It just kept going down and down, and I had an experience with some type of thing that just scared the Jesus out of me, that I would never even return to that spot again. And it wasn't until I've heard this show tonight talking about the Jinn that it kind of clicked, like maybe that's probably the missing link, is that it was such a scary experience that, in hindsight, I never thought of it as angels or demons, but this idea of the Jinn could pretty much fill in the blanks for me.
And Rosemary, how do we, like Rick is saying, how do we know the difference?
Sometimes it's hard to tell because the Jinn act in so many ways that we associate with malevolent entities like demons. They're very trickster-like. They can terrify people. They can assume any shape. Some of the differences are the way they deal with people. Demonic cases tend to be a progression of infiltration of a person's environment and then their mind, and then in full-blown possession cases, their body, with the agenda of subverting a person's free will to make choices for evil so that their soul is condemned to hell. And the Jinn have more self-serving agendas. They're interested in using people for their own ends, not in serving, the cause of absolute evil, so to speak. And they tend to be very persistent and often very unpredictable and resistant to a lot of remedies that we employ against other malevolent entities.
Good point. Phil, you want to add anything to that?
Well, what I believe is that I would say I can't really say that everything is responsible for a Jinn, but I don't really believe, when you talk about demons or demonic agents, in Islam, there are no fallen angels. So, no fallen angels have become demons. They were made of pure light. They're incorruptible. And the only evil that is in the universe, according to the beliefs, are Jinn and human beings and people, physical beings in the universe. So, people really get confused when they talk about demons and what demons are and so on and so on. To me, I think they're all different types of Jinn, because if, according to Islam, God made three, and then the holy man told me, he said that God made three separate beings in the universe. Made angels, physical beings, and Jinn. And there are many classes of Jinn. So they can be very complex, and they can take on many, many different personalities, many different guises, and act many different ways. And they're very complex, so you really can't identify them as being such, because there's such a great diversity in the Jinn culture.
Okay, let's go back to the phones. We'll go to Las Vegas, Nevada. Chris on our wild card line. Hey, Chris.
Hey, this is me.
Hi, me.
Your last caller, I was just wondering if you had a question, why was he telling you guys what you already know? I had a question for your caller, or for your guest. Just wondering if fallen angels couldn't be the Jinn that's going on, and how does that work with the prophecies of the Bible? Just kind of wondering.
Go ahead, Phil. I'll let you address it.
Well, if you look at Islam, well, like I said before, there are no fallen angels. There are Jinn, and when you look at Christianity's version of the fall of the angels, they are angels that fell out of grace and were cast out of heaven. But in the Islamic version, they're Jinn. They're not angels. So, it depends upon, what you really want to believe. I don't really like to look at this in the religious point of view. I think there are intelligent beings in the universe, and that we call them different things. Angels are higher evolved beings of light, made of photonic energy, perhaps. Jinn are made of plasma, and human beings are made out of molecules, and so on. So I think your question is that, there, according to the Islamic belief, there are no fallen angels. There are just Jinn. Okay.
Next up, Geneva. We go to Moselle, Mississippi, east of the Rockies. Hey, Geneva.
Hey, George Norris. It's nice to get through to you, and good morning, Rosemary and Phil. I have had encounters with jinns all throughout my life. It all started back when I think I was about 16 years old. These things would, while I would be getting ready for bed and such, and settling in for the night, these things would dive on top of me, and they would literally hold my tongue so I could not yell. And they would terrify me. Well, one time I encountered him. I don't know if I was dreaming or if I was awake, because it seemed so real to me. But I don't. He was about 5'2", and he was real skinny, so skinny that I could see his ribs. And he had huge, dark black eyes. You could not see through them. His skin was a light gray, and it looked to be like leather. And he had horns, gray horns, coming from the front of his forehead all the way into his, and they grouped together in the back into his spinal cord. And this thing was so scary to me that I fell to my knees outside of my shop. And I was so scared of him. But for some reason, I wanted to reach out and touch his skin to see what he felt like, because his skin looked like it may be soft. Well, without him speaking, because I did not see his mouth, he spoke with his mind to me, telling me that if I would say his name, he had 3 names, and I couldn't read them, but I do know that all 3 of them started with the letter M, and he said if I would tell him his names, and he carved them out with his long fingernails onto a tree, and when I seen it, I couldn't read it, but anyway, he said that if I told him his names, he would tell me all the secrets that I would want to know about why we're here, all about life and God and everything. And then I looked down at the ground, and I seen thousands of snakes, all different kinds. You could barely walk because of the snakes. Well, I ran into the house to where my mother was by the sink, and I told her what I encountered. And she said, "You didn't say his names, did you?" And I said, "I don't know. I could have, thought of them in my mind, but I didn't say them out loud." And she says, "Do you know what you have done?" And whenever I said this, we had together my babies and my husband, and we all got into the truck. And as we were leaving out of the drive, I saw this woman standing by some gas tanks that used to be a little store there. And she was standing there, and I could see her head just roll off of her shoulders. And another time that I experienced him, he was sitting, it was a different Jinn, same color tone, and he was sitting at the end of my bed, and his eyes were a putrid green, and he was eating flesh, and blood was draining from his mouth, and he said that he was going to be the one to possess me, and I wanted to get the thoughts of your guests on that.
Well, okay. Who want Phil? That sounds like you.
It does?
You're elected.
Well, what you're talking about, we cover quite a bit. I've covered, too, in some of my research, these nighttime visitations where these entities have appeared before these people and pinned them down, paralysis and so on.
Sure, the old hag syndrome.
Yeah, and appeared in many different forms and tried to terrorize people. And more or less, it's more or less to break down the resistance to them. They either do it by coming and visiting you and putting on I'm the good little fairy act and I'm your friend, or sometimes they'll just come in and just induce terror so that you're so frightened, and that breaks you down so much so that they can get to you then. But, her encounters do sound like Jinn encounters, and for some reason or another, some people are more susceptible to these encounters than other people. And I think it has to do a lot with the psychic makeup of the individual and also how fearful you are. If you've been brought up to be fearful of the dark or fearful of these strange creatures, they seem to approach you more because they like to generate the fear. Whether they're doing it because they're having fun with you, or they're using it to feed, or they're using it to some type of connection, is not clear. But I've heard many stories like what the caller just called in about. And I'm sure Rosemary has, too.
I would like to add a couple of comments to what Phyllis said, too, that strengthen the Jinn explanation for this. Her description of the creature, the dark eyes with the light gray, kind of leathery skin, and the way the horns went about the head, I have encountered that before in some of the cases that I feel are Jinn rather than demonic. Speaking the name of this entity 3 times is a very genie-like way of releasing something from its boundaries. In other words, giving it more access to her and to the physical realm. And there is precedence in the Jinn literature for the Jinn offering to teach secret wisdom in exchange for something in a pact. And then also we have an association with the flesh-eating because the ghoul, the flesh-eating ghoul, is a type of Jinn. So these are all characteristics that we would associate with a Jinn entity.
Okay, let's go to Michael in Sacramento, west of the Rockies. Michael, good morning.
Good morning. How's it going, George?
Good. Thanks.
Okay, the question that I had, it's a little intricate. I was wondering, you guys had mentioned the blue Jinn and how they're the most powerful, they're the oldest, possibly the most sagacious, wise.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any possibility that maybe these entities, their purpose or design here on Earth is more so to kind of embody what we can become if we don't rise above our fears, rise above our, tribal mentalities that we have with each other, and really seek, I guess, in essence, like the stars, versus plundering the earth, or because when you say that they were an ancient species and they had pillaged the earth, is it that their mission here is to teach us indirectly not to do that?
Lessons learned here, Rosemary or Phil?
Well, I think originally Jinn were here to teach humans not to make the same mistakes, and we, as human beings, we're not supposed to make the same mistakes the Jinn did, use them as a lesson, what not to do. But unfortunately, we are polluting the planet. We are making war with each other. We are making terrible weapons to destroy each other. We're following the same pattern that, according to the ancient legends of the Jinn, did, and why they were taken out of this world by a higher order of beings. Human beings are doing the same thing. So I think, we can look at the Jinn history and say, gee, if this is true, we can learn from their mistakes and rise up to become a better society. But it doesn't seem like that's happening.
All right. Mary? Stay with us. We're going to take this quick break. We'll come back with both of you on Coast to Coast AM. Well, have you heard of the work by Dr. Robert Becker called The Body Electric? Our next Coast to Coast show, Dr. Jerry Tennant and Dr. Mark Starr will join us as we will talk about using voltage. No, don't put your finger in a socket, but using voltage to heal yourself. It's an amazing story. That'll be our next Coast to Coast show. And when we come back, we'll take final phone calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. Well, Rosemary and Phil, this universe is so vast, and there's so many things going on, probably in the multiverse, that we just don't comprehend, we don't understand. And to me, I guess it's very possible, conceivable, that the Jinn exists throughout this entire structure.
I think they do, and I think it's, as we get more educated about these entities in our culture, it's important to know that they're interested in manipulating us for their own ends. I think there are other entities that we have contact with that some of it's happenstance, you're in the right place at the right time. Some of them may have minimal interest in taking advantage of us, but the Jinn seem to have a high interest in taking advantage of us, at least those who are deliberately interacting with us.
Have you found, Phil, in your research that the Jinn overall, that they're just, mischievous, or that they're evil or good?
I think they're all of the above, just like human beings. I mean, you have many different personalities. Some people like vanilla ice cream. Some people like strawberry ice cream. Some Jinn like different things. They dislike different things. Some Jinn are psychotic. Some Jinn are neurotic. And unfortunately, it seems that from some of the cases we've investigated that some people do link up with a psychotic Jinn, and it could be very dangerous. Also, one thing, whether the Jinn exist or not, I mean, these dimensional beings most likely do exist. They could account for a lot of the phenomena that we see. Obviously, their place of residence, this other dimension, has shown up in the equations in theoretical physics. So scientists, up at MIT, down at Caltech and Princeton, they believe these other dimensions exist. And now they're saying, hey, at first when we first theorized this stuff, these other dimensions were looped and tight around each other with very little space. Now the equations are showing that these dimensions are formidable spaces, and they're saying now many of the younger theoretical physicists are saying, gee, why can't there be other living beings or creatures in them?
Absolutely. This text message in from Daniel in San Antonio wants to know if angels and demons are in conflict with jinns. Who wants that?
We certainly have accounts of conflicts, at least between the angels and the jinn, and of course between angels and demons as well. More likely, the jinn would work in concert with demons rather than against them, because they both have some of the same angles and interests against human beings.
Kyle's in Victoria, Texas. Welcome to Coast, Kyle. Go ahead.
Hello, George. First-time caller.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just wanted a question for Mr. Philip Brogno.
Sure thing.
He mentioned in his book, I read Files from the Edge, that he said that sometimes the jinn, they'll either make a pact or forcefully take over a person's body to experience our emotional state. Am I correct on that assumption?
Well, jinn, they want to experience physical pleasure, so they will make a deal with a person, let me inhabit your body so I can experience this and that, and I will in turn give you whatever you want. But the problem is that in some of these cases that have been followed up throughout history, is that sometimes the jinn gets into the body and doesn't want to leave. And then they may leave, the person may commit a crime, and all of a sudden the jinn will leave, and the person finds himself back in the body, his own body, and consciousness in his own body, and all of a sudden he's on trial and he's saying, I didn't do anything, the devil made me do it.
Yeah, something whispered in my ear, something like that.
And you see cases like this throughout history where people are in court because they murdered somebody, or they sexually assaulted somebody, or they did something, and all of a sudden they say, I don't remember doing these things. It was something that took me over, and they start accounting, the devil made me do it, and their lawyer starts to say, well, it was temporarily insanity, and these person, if they're found insane, they're usually put in mental institutions for the criminally insane. And the jinn's laughing, and the jinn's laughing. I got what I wanted. Okay, goodbye. I don't care about.
Does the jinn need to be invited in?
Well, that's what I understand. That I don't know if that's true or not, but the person has to accept the jinn. Seems that according to some of the very ancient beliefs and the stories I've heard about jinn behavior, some of them do have very religious beliefs, and they're afraid. They believe in angels, and they're afraid of angels because they know angels are watching over them and what they do. But if a person willingly accepts the jinn to come in and say, yes, I want power, I want this, jinn, you could come in and work through me and get physical pleasures, but in turn, you grant me my 3 wishes or my wish to become power. I mean, there are like incredible paranoid stories about certain politicians, certain world leaders, certain people who are in entertainment who made deals with jinn. There are many people in the Islamic community who believe this.
Okay, let's go back for final calls now. We'll pick it up by going to West Palm Beach, Florida. Daryl, first-time caller. Hi, Daryl. Go ahead. Daryl, you with us? Nope, he's not. But west of the Rockies, Michael is in Sacramento. Go ahead, Michael.
Hey again. So one other question that I did have, kind of picking up off the subject that we last talked about, is it possible that we are seeing more and more jinn interactions because these entities are kind of like at this last-ditch effort to try to spark some consciousness into us for us to kind of wake up? So we follow a path of a future versus a path of destruction.
How about you on this, Rosemary?
I don't think the jinn are trying to help us that much. I think the blue jinn, who are probably the wisest of them, they've seemed to have retreated much the same way that fairies have retreated instead of trying to interact with us. The jinn seem to be more interested in upset and chaos, and that's what we see in a lot of these jinn cases, that there's just a constant interference and agitation going on to keep people upset and unbalanced mentally and physically. And there's not much indication that they're trying to come in as counselors.
I think it's just amazing at how many of these cultures have identified this entity in being, in its life, in their lives. Strange. Let's go to Mohammed in San Diego. Go, Mohammed. Hi.
Good morning, Mr. Nori, and good morning to your guest. Mr. Nori, your guests tonight is phenomenal. They are great. They have very highly educated themselves about the jinn. Whatever information they give you tonight, they're excellent on that, and 100% I appreciate it. Thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
I have some information about the jinn that actually, because I'm Muslim, that I've been told by my father and by scholars and everything that jinn actually can be under your command. There's a book, I forgot the name of the book. They can be under your command. You can tell them whatever they can do. What you want to do and make them to do, they will do for you. And also, jinn actually been used why some of the scholars are saying right now that it could be built up even the pyramids in Egypt. Also, in the Middle East, not just the Muslims, but the Christians and the Jews also, they believe in jinn in the Middle East and Asia. But actually, they can use jinn and destroy their enemies or run away from the jail or escape some trouble things. Jinn could be their friend, and they can help them through troubled times, or they can beat up their enemies with it.
What does the jinn want in return, Mohammed, if they're going to do that?
I heard that if you make them under your command, and once they do your job done, and they will come back to you and say, "Okay, I've done whatever you want. Now I'm going to be, free from you, so I can do whatever I can do." I think that's the deal with the jinn and the human between both of them. Your guys was, like I said, they're great on that. They give you all the information. It's perfect. I believe there's a lot about jinns. Jinns are like human civilizations. I believe they have kids. They have a family just like us. If you bother them, they can destroy you really easy.
Yeah.
Since we cannot see them and they can see us, and there's about 7 dimensions in Islam. Believe Islam that they have 7 dimensions. So jinn is one of the dimensions that we cannot see them. They can see us. God gives them some kind of a ability to see us, but we cannot see them. So it's kind of weird, but they are dangerous. So I believe back in Middle East and Asia, some of the young kids, they cannot even get out overnight because they are scared of the jinns and all their family. So I guess that's why there's not much of crime, because with people not going, especially at nighttime. And jinn will not show themselves to a bunch of people. They will, show themselves like when you're alone. So I don't know what your guys take on that.
Okay. Well, I'll let you take this, Phil. Thanks, Mohammed.
Well, we're aware that, there's belief that every person has a jinn counterpart, and it more or less takes the place of the guardian angel. And it seems that at one time, yes, Allah, God, said to people, to the jinn, look over human beings, but in time they resented it and wanted to be free. As being able to control the jinn, I don't know if I really think that's true from what I've read and what I've understood. I think a lot of that comes in with people trying to subdue their fears about this race of beings that's invisible to them, that can really strike at them if they choose.
It's almost like the 3 wishes. You give me the 3 wishes and I'll let you out of the bottle, basically.
Yeah, it's sort of like that, but it seems at one time, yes, jinn were obligated to serve human beings. And, there are stories about jinn also building the Great Pyramids of Egypt and actually teaching the sciences and teaching language and teaching the written language to human beings. In Christianity and Judaism, that job was left by angels to do. So in a lot of the Islamic beliefs, angels are replaced by jinn, and some of the things that jinn do were for the benefit of the human race, but they resented it after that.
Let's go to Patty now in San Francisco. Patty, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Oh, good. I just recently found out about your program, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, now you're a regular, Patty.
I'm a high school teacher. I don't talk to other people about these kind of things because they think I'm insane. So it's nice to be able to speak on the program. But too bad my friend's sleeping, so she would love to hear me on it. So I've been trying and trying. I'm Chinese, so I like to put into a little bit input of what Chinese do.
Sure.
So it was mind-blowing today because I did not know. I keep thinking, because my mom told me about things in Taiwan and in China. There are actually witch doctors. They actually capture jinn and then have them do things for people. So, but for a price. So this will all coincides what Rosemary and Phil talk about, that they really want some kind of price. They don't just do things for free. So you have
always a connection here for something, right?
Yes, and there's one very famous case, and what's on the news. If you Google it, you could even see it. And about this guy, and he went to this witch doctor, and he just, he got him a gym, and then he wants to be a millionaire, so he plays lottery. So he bought this lottery ticket, and the gym actually told him what numbers to put on. So he got this number, and then he also promised the gym if he becomes a millionaire, he will give him anything he asked for. So what happened is on the news, it showed it's very tragic. On the video footage, he became a millionaire, and he won the lottery. And 2 days after, his son got killed because he bought his son a Porsche.
Oh.
So, and his son was trying to the Porsche stuck between the door and the garage door.
Yeah.
So he got off the car and he didn't put the Porsche
in park,
do the brake,
yeah.
And then he got in front of the car trying to open up and the Porsche ran over him.
Crushed him.
And it was caught on tape, so it was shown on the news. And on the bottom of the time of he died is exactly the number of the lottery that his dad.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
They do work in strange ways. Thanks, Patty, for the call. Couple minutes to go. Horrible, Rosemary.
Well, there are many such cases like this, and I think sometimes people may unwittingly make pacts with these entities simply by sending out thoughts and intentions for selfish purposes or material gain or power or something like that, and demons answer that call and Jinn answer that call.
Ezekiel in L.A. sends in a text, wants to know if the Jinn, if they put curses on people. What do you think?
They can, most definitely. If the Jinn are wronged in any way, and we can do this inadvertently, and there are many cases out of folklore of we can't see them, and so we have to be careful that we don't injure them or harm them in any way. The Jinn are revenge-oriented, and if one of their kind is harmed deliberately or unwittingly, they will come back with a campaign against that individual and their family members, and it can become like a curse that affects generations.
And they're relentless to come after you.
You got to be careful. I wonder if we can cut a deal with them and send them down to cap the Gulf.
Oh, there would be a price on that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they're enjoying that because it's just proving that we can't take care of this world.
Do they like chaos?
They do, yes. They like to keep people off balance. And they find your most vulnerable point, your Achilles heel, for doing that.
All right, Rosemary, thank you so much. Phil, always a pleasure, my friend. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, that's Phil in Brugno and Rosemary Ellen Guiley. Their upcoming book, which is coming out in March of next year, which will get here soon enough. It's called The Vengeful Jinn, spelled with a D, D-J-I-N-N, The Vengeful Jinn, unveiling the hidden agendas of genies. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladesseur, Stephanie Smith, Ross Mitchell, George Nappy, and Punnett and Art Bell, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.